stewardship at the end of the day, nurturing your donors, it's really no different than advocating with, civic leaders. I mean, I think all charities and nonprofits, if they aren't already haven't introduced themselves or reached out to their local councillor, their MP or their MPP, then that's something they should do immediately, because they want to know who are the civil society organizations that are trying to, working on the ground level, trying to make our city better.
Hi, friends. Ever wondered how you could turn your big ideas into results? I'm Maria Rio, your go-to guide for helping small nonprofits have real-world impacts. Together, let's reimagine a better sector, tackle systemic issues, and yes, raise some serious cash. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Small Nonprofit Podcast. Today, I have an amazing guest for you planned. I have Alison Stewart on the line. Hello, Alison.
Hello, Maria. Happy to be here and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We're recording this in January, so if you're hearing this a little bit later, Happy New Year to you too, future. But yeah, so today I'm joined by Alison, and I'm really excited to have her share her insights with us because she has an incredibly unique role for someone who works in a nonprofit of, our sizes. So I'm really excited for her to introduce herself and to share all her insight with you today. So Alison, can you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff?
All right. Well, I will mention that I'm currently the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy for Cycle Toronto, which is a grassroots charity that is member supported in Toronto, Ontario, that advocates, educates on building better cycling infrastructure and culture so that as many people as possible feel comfortable trying to bike, because it is the most efficient, practical, and affordable way to get around Toronto these days. That said, before I started this amazing role, I come with multi-sector experience, and beginning back in the day as a designer for shoes and accessories, and sales, marketing, communications, and advertising, followed by government. So I actually work for an Office of the Assembly, doing complaint resolutions and community liaison, advocating for the rights of linguistic minority francophones in Ontario, followed by post-secondary. So one of the things that I love about, my career path is that, having that multi-sector approach, you realize that regardless of the industry, job, or even geography where you're living, there are certain foundations that are transferable everywhere. So as we're going to talk today, in my current role, there's sort of a mix of, advocacy, government relations, community building, organizing. Those are all things that transfer well. So I am looking forward to sharing some of my experience and some of the new insights that I've gained in my current role, because even though I have been volunteering throughout my life for different organizations, and I actually began volunteering for Cycle Toronto in 2013, this is the first time that I've actually worked full-time for a non-for-profit. So that also has been a learning curve for me.
I didn't know your career was so different. It's like 4 different sectors. That's really, really interesting. And I'd love to hear more about how those skills have been brought forward to your current role. That sounds really exciting. But just for our audience, many small nonprofits, they don't have a director of policy. That's just something that they're never going to have. And I wish usually it's being done off the side of the desk, if there's any organizing at all. Can you tell us what is a director of policy? What does your role look like?
Well, so when you are a small team and, as a director of advocacy and public policy, my role on the one hand, that advocacy. So advocating to deliver our mandate. So whereas a big role for Cycle Toronto is trying to convince our civic leaders in Toronto that it makes sense to build cycling infrastructure and to build a cycling culture, because it improves the public health, it improves the sustainability, it reduces congestion, all these great reasons. And so that advocacy part involves, one, building support from our supporters and members to, support us by writing letters to council or come to IEC to depute. On the other hand, building the public policy lens, that's really analyzing some of the city's programs, initiatives, and providing recommendations on how they can be improved. So, for example, that they take an equity lens impact, and that the impact of their objective is going to be as they've intended, if you will. So, for example, if Bike Share, for example, announced that they were modernizing their price structure last year, and I quickly took a look at what they were proposing and started working with other partners, other people in the community, to try to get a handle on what we should be asking for to make sure that it would support those most in need. So, for example, reaching out to the Gig Workers United, who have a better handle of some of the immediate challenges of their base of people that deliver our food and who were deemed essential workers throughout the pandemic. So I like to say that without public policy, advocacy is just yelling about what I want, right? Because that public policy research analysis is really integral to making sure that what you're advocating makes the most sense for, and that will benefit as many people as possible.
And how big is Cycle TO?
We are currently a staff contingent of 5.
5! So I guess that means that advocating and public policy is a big part of the program delivery. Is that correct?
It's certainly part of the program delivery centered around advocating for better and more cycling infrastructure. But it also, obviously, being a small organization, I collaborate and work with my colleagues who oversee our partnerships and events, right? Because there's often, if you can feed as many birds with a grain, then that really is to your best interest. So I like to try to infuse in any event that I'm organizing, I want to make sure that it includes an element of fun, of engagement, of knowledge, as a way of really trying to engage our people and get them to venture into different aspects of Cycle Toronto. And in fact, it's really no different than my experience as a volunteer. I began by, just following their newsletters. I then became a member. And then I thought, why wouldn't I volunteer? And started volunteering at bike stations before I jumped into becoming a ward advocacy volunteer. So, really, as you likely know, when you're working for a small charity, you all wear multiple hats, and you may have a specific title or role, but there's a lot of intermingling or dipping your toes in other people's projects to support.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, we're all very familiar with doing 17 jobs at once. So you're definitely preaching to the choir. But yeah, it's just really interesting because so many nonprofits at around this size or even larger, I've seen nonprofits up to like 50, 70 people who don't prioritize this kind of public policy advocacy as part of their program delivery. It's always seen as a communication piece, if that. And there's not usually a dedicated staff person. So that's why I was so interested in bringing you on to talk about your experience, because I don't know many people in your role. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you use your role and how you position your organization to interact with the government. And is that all levels of government, municipal? I guess it's mostly just municipal. I don't know. Tell me about it.
For one, communications is a big part. And so, for example, we have a communications manager, and I support him by providing a lot of the information and content to then package up for our different mediums, if you will. In terms of my role dealing with government, Cycle Toronto is definitely, our mandate is really centered on Toronto. And so we work largely with the municipality. But we also occasionally work provincially as well, because as you know, a lot of the legislation that is governed and overseen that impacts us, in our daily lives in municipalities stem from the province. So notably the Highway Traffic Act, which governs how our roads function. But also we recently supported an MPP, Joel Harden from Ottawa, to make amendments to the Highway Traffic Act to improve the safety of vulnerable road users. So in terms of my main function on a daily basis, I collaborate and reach out to Toronto City staff, to councillors from across the wards, as well as BIAs, residents associations, and different community groups, and as well as, our supporter base from the different wards, because it's really important to make sure that the councillors are hearing from their local residents. Because Cycle Toronto has been successful at having a strong brand that's known for advocating for all things cycling in Toronto, we are sometimes perceived or referred to as the bike lobby. And so it's more valuable if, we can support some of the local constituents that are trying to make improvements versus Cycle Toronto, right? So we do it all, right? We won, like in terms of the government relations, I try to build productive relationships with all councillors, even those that may not be natural supporters of cycling infrastructure. Finding that common ground is at the root of any effective relationship building, client relations, stewardship, or advocacy. So that is really the bulk of what I do. And so to give you an example, because on Tuesday, the first Infrastructure and Environment Committee of the year is taking place. For many of your listeners who may not know what that is, it's a committee of councillors that review any projects that are related to infrastructure or the environment before they then pass it on or refer it back to council for approval. So in terms of cycling infrastructure, any and all projects that we are specifically and very interested in will go through this committee first. So the first step, for example, to getting a kilometer of a new bikeway approved begins by going to this committee. So once the agenda drops, we take a look at it, see what's important to us, and then start formulating what we like, what we don't like, what we should say. And we reach out to those councillors at the committee to see if we can chat to them and figure out what they're thinking, what they'd like to see, why they'll support it, why they won't, and start addressing those questions before the committee. And then on the other hand, we're also sending out action alerts to our supporters and inviting people to write letters of support, as well as to join me at City Hall to make deputations, which is a really fun way of, discovering the municipal process that takes place. So that's one of the fun things that I love most about my job is educating and supporting people make their first deputation.
That's so exciting. Okay, so let me just summarize it, just because it's a lot to take in for someone like me who doesn't do government relations as often as I would like. So first, be friends with all the counselors. At least get to know them, even the ones that are not going to support you. That's an important part. Relationship building, X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
Then you're looking for the agendas for these specific committees. And then do you have to submit that you want to speak, that you want to depute, or can you just show up and be like, I want to talk about this?
Great question. Yes, you need to, all the agendas come with links that you can, each item you can submit to speak, or you can submit to email your comments.
Okay.
And so one of the things we do in our deputation trainings is help people navigate the City of Toronto website and also make it easy for people to sign up. So for example, right now, we've sent out a mailing and a sign up sheet and are trying to get as many people to sign up to depute. And then to help them, and my team and I, we can help specifically register them to make sure that they're going to be on the speakers list or that they know how to depute from home because they have that option.
That's awesome. And for the people that you're inviting to depute on this issue, that you're telling them like, hey, this might be interesting to you, are these people your donors or are they your service users? Or what does that look like?
They are a mix of our members who pay, like our paid members. There are supporters who have signed up to receive our newsletters. There are volunteers. It's a mix of anyone, right? That's something, they're part of our community. So anyone that wants to engage with the civic process and wants to help make the city a better, more vibrant cycling city, then we will help bring them along.
Nice.
And that's and then that will channel into the ladder of engagement.
Nice. Okay. So you're friends with the counselors, you are set to depute, you are bringing in your different community members to depute. Now, what does the deputation actually look like? How long is it? How much research do people have to put into it themselves? Like, are you presenting other kinds of research done from different organizations, or is it only yours?
Well, at the end of the day, a deputation is essentially a 3 to 5 minute elevator pitch where you introduce yourself, you explain why you're there, why you're hoping the counselors should care as well, and you're providing a specific personal story about why and how that policy impacts you and what you'd like to see change. What we do is we will provide talking points based on our position, but absolutely we encourage that, there's a difference between Cycle Toronto deputing, right? We have an organization, we have specific policies, we, work with city staff and counselors to formulate and find a solution. But when you're a person deputing, it's really important that they share that personal experience because, it's not often that someone takes the time to either write in to council or to depute, right? When you think about all the things that people are just trying to do to get through their day, even the simple thing of calling 311 to report, a dead raccoon on the street or something, right? That takes additional time. And that's something that we have increasingly less of. One thing I would just like to mention when you said be friends with counselors, it's not a matter of seeking to be friends with counselors, but rather, build a respectful, productive relationship that, where you can find the common ground and agree to disagree, but just focus on what you do agree on. And
Nice.
hey, it's sometimes you may become friends, but really at the end of the day, counselors are really busy. And so in any form of government relations or stewardship, it's always really important to be as respectful as their time, because as much as I have a really busy schedule, I can't imagine what the daily routine of a city councillor is in Toronto. So making sure that any kind of comments, suggestions, or discussion items that I want to put to them, I do so very clearly in a helpful manner where I try to give them it's like a briefing notes, like I would be briefing, say, a deputy minister of the provincial government, like, here's your issue, here's the concerns, here's how it could be improved. And putting together those briefing notes, not only is it easy to circulate to, the current members that you're targeting in advance of a meeting, but also informing other counselors that may want to be aware of the situation because it might be an item that is important to them in advance of council. because anything that's approved to IEC then needs to go to council. So it's really just about how do I make other people's lives easier so that they can help me, if you will.
Yes, for sure. I wanted to circle back to something that you said earlier around connecting with someone in Ottawa. So for some of our listeners who may be living in the States, Toronto and Ottawa are not super close together. It's about like a 5-hour drive. So it's just really interesting that you connected with someone who is a provincial representative in Ottawa to talk about this. So how do relationships like that come about?
So for example, it all has to do with when someone has an issue that they want addressed. You take a look at, okay, if I want to solve this issue, who do I need to speak to that will be aligned with my objectives and that may be able to help me and that may be interested in helping me. And so applying that strategy to MPP Joel Harden, who literally rode his bike and built a tour from Ottawa all the way to Queen's Park in Toronto to generate awareness and build support for his, Moving Ontarians Safely Act.
And that sounds like an insane bike ride.
It's not something that I have done yet. It's on my list. The fact that he did it in less than 6 days is pretty impressive. And so part of his ambition was he made several stops en route, including Scarborough and Toronto. And so to help get him, he reached out to us and we helped connect him with other cycling organizations and constituents to ensure that when he arrived to at least the Scarborough leg, that he was greeted by, a strong community of supporters that wanted to share their stories. And then we greeted him in Toronto along with Mayor Chow and MPP Kristen Wong-Tam and others at Queen's Park. And it was a wonderful day. So for example, we held like a sharing circle and he spoke about his tour and everyone got the opportunity to speak and share examples of why improving the safety for vulnerable road users is so important. So it was a great community building and it was nice, for example, to work with the provincial leader. And we also got to join him along with our other community supporters at Queen's Park when he held a press release to announce his posing of the bill. Forget the term all of a sudden. So that's how that happened.
Okay, great. Yeah, wow. That sounds like a lot of collaboration. So that's super nice to hear. What is the role of collaboration when it comes to pushing for bills or any kind of thing that you'd like from the government? So, for example, you mentioned collaborating with some of your community members, so individuals, but how often do you collaborate with other organizations?
All the time. So, for example, as a small organization, and collaboration is really key to getting anything done. And I will say that across all of my roles and sectors, I have always been in a position where I haven't been able to deliver on my projects without successful collaboration with others. And that is no different regarding building community support and encouraging people to connect. And for example, in the active transportation sector, especially in charities, we're all small organizations, right? So we have shared objectives. And so there are various coalitions. We have an alliance for the safe and active streets in Toronto that is composed of other organizations that may have somewhat different mandates, but we all share the ultimate objective of building complete streets that include protected bikeways, that include better pedestrian realm, that includes road safety initiatives that will slow the speed of motor vehicle, improve pedestrian crossings. We all support transit because we recognize, transit really represents the majority mode of how people get around in Toronto, right? They represent almost half of all road users. And then you have people that walk and bike. So really the people that get around by driving are really in the minority. It just looks like they are the majority because they take up so much darn space. And because we've spent the past 70 years building our cities around the automobile. Mm-hmm. So that collaboration with like-minded organizations is really helpful, especially when we're organizing rallies, when we're organizing letter writing campaigns. They're part of our network and people who we can call to with, let's say, less than 2 days notice to say, hey, are you going to IEC? Any chance you can, support, write a letter for this item. So there's a bit of quid pro quo and that kind of collaboration taking place. And as well, community groups, right? So for example, especially since Cycle Toronto has been successful at supporting the city build a grid of connected bikeways in the core, it's really now important that that minimum grid be fast-tracked and expedited out to the inner suburbs. So, for example, working with different community groups in Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke to help bring that advocacy that was needed and achieved towards building the current bikeways in Toronto. And so one of our priorities now is building out and reaching out to community groups that will be aligned to help build that support for bikeways, where it becomes a bit more of a different sell, if you will.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the different sell approach because, I don't know, like something like poverty seems to more neatly fit into different mandates that different representatives of levels of government might have. But what about something as unique as biking? Or I'll give you an example based on your dead raccoon on the street. I want to set up a raccoon sanctuary, right? That doesn't fit in anybody's mandate letter. How could an organization sell that so they can gain support?
Well, for example, there's public health. So one of the things where we talk about biking, biking used to be viewed as a fringe activity, right? But because we've built some safe infrastructure where more people, including women and children, are able to bike comfortably, it becomes more of an attractive option. And increasingly, to help sell a bike lane, it's no longer just about bike lanes. It's about complete streets. Because where you have protected bike lanes, you also have an improved and attractive and comfortable pedestrian realm, right? Essentially, when you're next to an arterial or a stroke, 4 lanes of highway that are speeding over 60 kilometers an hour, and you have narrow sidewalks and long distances between transit stops, that's a completely unsafe environment. And so finding that connection, right? So for example, part of my advocacy last week with our alliance was reaching out to, the chair of economic and community development to help see how they can help support or how we can build cases of support for example, pedestrianizing areas, right? And to sort of dial up how areas that have protected bike lanes, really those communities thrive, right? Despite the perception, people like to say, oh, my business is going to go down. Well, what we've seen in actual case studies is that store owners overestimate the number of customers that visit them by car. And I'm speaking specifically about, Bloor West and Danforth. That may change depending on, Etobicoke, areas of Etobicoke or Scarborough. But essentially, it's also connecting it to things like public health, right? We have a public health crisis, and biking is part of that solution, right? You're moving. There are studies that prove that people that commute by bike are the healthiest and happiest commuters, right? Because you're moving, you have time to reflect. And hey, if you don't have time to make it to your workout or get some exercise in, biking, you're still actively working. So it's really trying to find out, how does this impact the city? And so back to your question about the dead raccoon on the street. Well, when there's, public health, that's how diseases can spread if you leave rotting animal carcasses in the street. That's certainly not healthy. What if someone's dog, or birds eat it? There's also, waste services and public morale. I mean, imagine if, dead raccoons were left across the streets and are overflowing garbage. Well, it begins to paint a picture of a city that isn't healthy and vibrant. And we've sort of been seeing some of that over the past few years. So we're looking forward to, under this new leadership of Mayor Chow, find ways of cleaning up the city so that people do feel safer and more comfortable.
So it's basically finding different kind of government groups that you can collaborate with. So maybe not exactly political representatives, but other bodies of government services.
Well, for one, it's always good to first call your counselor, right? So you reach out to your counselor so that they can advise on what you can do. That's your first stop if you want to try to improve something. And counselors are great at providing advice, because I don't know any counselor that would want their ward to be known as the ward that, has, dead raccoons on the street. And, why we keep going back to this dead raccoon, because one, it's so very Toronto. And there have been instances over the past couple of years, as I'm sure you recall, where people have created vigils where animals have been left on the street.
Which in itself can be a form of organizing and advocacy. So I'm super excited about that. Sorry to our listeners about the dead raccoon. Sorry.
But absolutely. And when we're talking about government, I mean, our municipality, we have an elected body of officials, right? And they represent, our neighbors. They're people that may live down your street. And anyone that takes the time and money to seek election, they're all people that are invested in, creating a better city. They may have different views of what that's like, but they're people and they're there to make a change. So it's really important to reach out and try to get to know your counselor. And the best way to do that is to, let them know of some of the issues that they may not be aware of, and start that conversation. And also take a look at, their website. They all have platforms that they put forward to get elected. And so before going to city council or your local councillor with a specific request, it's always helpful to take a look at what their campaign priority is, so that you can target your ask. So you can say, hey, this may be about a bike lane that has nothing to do with your concern for, the unhoused, our healthcare crisis, but this is how we can improve and tackle these issues in the ward by doing X, Y, and Z.
And is it a shared vision when you're pitching X, Y, and Z, or is it like a quid pro quo?
It's like marketing, right? Your sales, you're trying to, get their interest in an item that you think they should be interested in, or that you would like them to be interested in. And so you want to try to position it to how it should be an interest to them and how it might help them move some of their priorities that they have committed to when they got office. And if it doesn't, you can adapt and you can say, is this something like, do you have any advice? How can we advance this? And so, for example, some of the feedback we were given when we went as an alliance to Councillor Alejandra Bravo, who's chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee, she loved the fact that we came as an alliance and that we had a diverse range of people around the table. And because that's important to them, right? Seeing that we're not just coming in with one specific focus, but that we're talking to other organizations and other people about how we can advance their priorities. So that's really important. And again, counselors are busy. So if they can talk to, an organized group of maybe 10 different organizations that are seeking similar things, and we can bring our people together, then they get the opportunity to represent their issues to a wider audience.
What about for, those small organizations that are listening right now? They are loving what you're saying, but they don't know where to start. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say you're probably already doing it. I mean, stewardship at the end of the day, nurturing your donors, it's really no different than advocating with, civic leaders. I mean, I think all charities and nonprofits, if they aren't already haven't introduced themselves or reached out to their local councillor, their MP or their MPP, then that's something they should do immediately, because they want to know who are the civil society organizations that are trying to, working on the ground level, trying to make our city better, especially now because the government over the past 20 years have been offloading a lot of their services and programs to the nonprofit sector, right? So they are relying on the nonprofit sector to really deliver on their policy objectives, which is how they build their grants. So I think if nurturing your donors is important, well, nurturing those government constituents is just as important. And really that advocacy element is no different than the type of work you're doing to advance your cause, whether it's, raising funds for cancer research, for breast cancer, or for sending, kids from equity deserving communities to camp. It's really very similar. It's just change a few of the words and put that call in.
I love that. Yes. And I definitely agree. Like relationship building and advocacy go so hand in hand. So for anybody who has those skills and is interested in something like this, it's great to start trying it.
And people want to be on a successful campaign, right? Governments that give out money to deliver on their objectives and priorities, they want to see that success, right? So the more that organizations are communicating and advocating, you're demonstrating to your government officials or to your funders or to your potential donors that you are an energetic and hardworking organization that is really seeking to deliver maximum value for your donor or grant dollars.
Alison, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you to continue the conversation?
Well, my preferred social media is Twitter or X, whatever it's called, Alison V. Stewart, or on LinkedIn or at Cycle Toronto, alison.stewart at cycleto.ca. Please reach out. And it's the first week of January if you're looking for new things to try this year, or get on a bike, see how easy and efficient it can be.
Thanks for all you do when it comes to this form of public policy, because as we were just talking about, I just recently got back from vacation, and on the island, they had so many opportunities to bike and it just felt so safe. So I hope that's what the Toronto future looks like because of people like you, Alison.
Oh, thank you, Maria. And you know what? Toronto is already becoming that city, at least parts of Toronto, where it's become so much more comfortable to bike. So, there is progress. And thank you for your wonderful podcast and inspiring small nonprofits who sometimes are too busy to see the tree through the forest or the forest through the trees, however that goes.
I don't know. Okay, well, thank you everybody for tuning in to today's episode of The Small Nonprofit. I hope you are having a great year. And remember, we are on YouTube now. So if you want to see our lovely faces, you can find us there. That will be linked in the show notes below. And also Alison's X and LinkedIn will also be in the show notes. But thank you again for tuning in, and bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.